Here are the most epic one-on-one fights in human history. Number 1. Jean de Carouge versus Jacques Le Gris. We're going to start off with one of the most brutal 1v1 fights in recorded history, when jealousy turned best friends into mortal enemies who end up fighting to the death. It's the late 14th century in France, and two men named Jean de Carouge and Jacques Le Gris are squires serving under a local count in Lower Normandy. This is smack dab in the middle of the 100 Years' War, so Jean and Jacques often find themselves fighting side by side against the English. Their time together on the battlefield leads to a strong friendship, so strong, in fact, that when Jean's wife gives birth to his first son, he asks Jacques to become the child's godfather. So, life is good for Jean, but things begin to sour when the count they've been serving under dies, and the position is inherited by a man named Pierre d'Alençon. Both Jean and Jacques, having been loyal subjects, are invited to join the new count's inner circle. Nice. But for some reason he begins to heavily favor Jacques over Jean. The favoritism makes Jean insanely jealous, and this jealousy quickly destroys their friendship. On top of this, around the same time, Jean's wife and his young son fall ill and pass away. Heartbroken and lost, and with no reason to stick around in Normandy, Jean decides to get away from it all and goes off to England to fight in the 100 Years' War. Tales of his bravery make it back to France, and when he returns home, Jean is kind of a war hero. He meets and marries a beautiful young noble named Marguerite de Thibouville. Things are finally starting to look up again for our guy. But this marriage turns out to be the thing that ultimately ends the friendship between Jean and Jacques for good. See, by this time the two former friends haven't seen each other in years, but with Jean back in town planning to settle down again with his new wife, they both end up at a party, celebrating the birth of a neighbor's son. They bump into each other and get to talking, and they kind of remember why they were such good friends long ago. I know, like, why are we even mad at each other anyway? Oh, by the way, this is my wife, Marguerite. Bro, I'm like right here. Jacques is immediately attracted to Marguerite, and now he's jealous of Jean. But she's the wife of his friend, who is kind of like not his friend anymore, but is kind of his friend again. What is he going to do? Well, what he ends up doing is actually pretty messed up. See, Jean needs to earn more money, so he decides to go off to fight the English again. Only this time his campaign is a complete failure. Against all odds he somehow survives, and for his bravery he's knighted by the King of France, and he has to travel to Paris to collect his wages from the campaign. At the exact same time, Jean's mother has to go on a business trip. They all live together in a huge estate, by the way, and when she leaves, she takes all of the servants and guards with her, leaving Jean's new wife, Marguerite, all alone at home. Now, Jacques hears about this and goes to Jean's home. He sends one of his men-at-arms to knock on the door, and Marguerite, left without any servants or guards, opens the door herself. The soldier tells her that Jacques is here, and he's desperately in love with her and needs to see her right now. She refuses, but as she tries to close the door, Jacques forces his way in, and oh boy, let's just say he does the thing that rhymes with the word grapes. Violated, Marguerite is on the floor crying, and as he leaves, Jacques threatens her, saying if she tells anyone, she's dead. Jean returns home, and Marguerite tells him everything. He's furious and immediately files a criminal case against Jacques. But guess who the judge is? That douchebag Count Pierre, Jacques' new best friend. And the case is thrown out immediately. Jean goes to Paris to appeal the case to the King of France, himself. He shows the people in Paris that Marguerite is now pregnant. I mean, come on. But this doesn't do much because common knowledge of the day says that it was impossible to get pregnant from, grapes. With no witnesses other than Marguerite and Jacques, the courts say that they have no way to determine who's telling the truth. So Jean demands a trial by combat, an archaic form of judgment where two men fight to the death to see who's correct. If the courts can't decide who's telling the truth, they'll let God decide by shining fortune on one of them. Jacques is also pissed that his name is getting dragged through the mud, so he countersues Jean for defamation and agrees to the duel. Now, by this time in France, trial by combat was considered pretty barbaric and not something civilized people should be doing. But the king? He's actually super into the idea. Like, so much so that when there's a chance he might miss the fight, he pushes the whole event back to make sure he can be there. So on December 29th, 1386, the king, along with a crowd of nobles and spectators, gather at the Abbey of Saint-Martin-des-Champs in Paris to witness these two former friends fight to the death. Marguerite is also there, dressed in black, as today may also be her funeral. If Jean loses, it will mean that God has decided she was lying, and she would be burned at the stake as punishment. Before the bout begins, official orders from the king are read to the crowd. Throughout the event, no one is to say a word. If anyone does, they'll have a hand cut off as punishment. You can't have anyone putting curses on the combatants and clouding God's judgment after all. Both men are dressed in full steel-plated armor and carry into the arena the holy trinity of weapons, a lance, a battle axe, and a long sword, along with a long dagger. The battle will begin on horseback and continue until one man submits or dies. The two men mount their horses at opposite ends of the arena and are handed their lances. The trial of combat begins, and the two men charge towards each other and strike the shields of their opponent. Both reeling, they ready for a second pass, and this time both men strike each other in the helmet. Their ears ringing, they charge again for a third pass, again striking each other's shields, splintering their lances in the process. They turn their horses and draw their battle axes and charge in for a fourth pass, and this time Jacques swings his axe and cuts the neck of Jean's horse, killing it instantly. Jean tumbles to the ground. He scrambles back to his feet, turns and swings his axe, slicing the belly of Jacques' horse, who collapses, throwing Jacques to the ground. The two men draw their swords and charge at each other, swinging with evil intent. Jacques is the much larger man, and he quickly begins to gain the upper hand in the duel. He's battering Jean, who's struggling to defend against the powerful blows of his one-time friend. He can only withstand the beating for so long until Jacques finds an opening and stabs Jean in his thigh. The crowd gasps, as this fight may soon be coming to an end, and Jacques steps back and looks up towards the spectators. With this small opening, Jean lunges at Jacques and drags him to the ground by his helmet. Lying flat on his back, Jacques cannot stand with his heavy armor weighing him down. Jean mounts him and begins viciously stabbing at his chest with his sword, but as hard as he tries, he cannot pierce the steel plating. He throws his sword to the side and takes out his dagger, and with its handle, he begins to smash at the lock that secures Jacques' faceplate. A final strike breaks the lock, and he rips off the helmet, revealing the face of his one-time best friend. Holding a knife to his throat, Jean demands that Jacques confess to his crimes. Jacques defiantly screams, "In the name of God, and on the peril and damnation of my soul, I am innocent." With this, Jean can stomach no more disrespect, and plunges his dagger into the neck of his former friend, killing him instantly. The crowd erupts into cheers, and pages rush onto the field to treat Jean's wounded leg. Jean limps and kneels in front of the king, who's like, "That was fucking epic." He gives Jean a prize of 1,000 francs, worth about $300,000 today, and a royal payment of 200 francs a month, which is around 60K in today's money. Jean then limps to his wife Marguerite, and together they ride in a caravan to the Notre Dame Cathedral to give thanks to God for the long-awaited justice. They then live happily ever after for about 10 years, and then Jean goes off and dies in a crusade. Bro just couldn't retire. Number 2. Miyamoto Musashi versus Sasaki Kojiro. It's not often we get to see two legendary fighters go up against each other in their primes, but this is exactly what happened in this story when Miyamoto Musashi went up against the most skilled swordsman of his time, Sasaki Kojiro, in an epic duel to the death. The date is April 13th, 1612, and on the shore of a small island off the coast of southern Honshu called Ganryujima, a samurai is silently seething in anger as he watches the sun begin to fall in the afternoon sky. He's a tall, powerful man who towers over his disciples, and on his shoulder he's carrying a giant 3-foot-long sword called a nodachi, a weapon so big only someone his size could even dream of using it properly. His name is Sasaki Kojiro, a man many at the time considered to be the most skilled swordsman in all of Japan. Months ago, he was challenged to a duel by a ronin named Miyamoto Musashi, and he's impatiently awaiting his arrival. Musashi is late, and Kojiro is taking it personally. The inconsiderate behavior goes completely against the code of the samurai. The sun continues to set, and finally, a whole 3 hours later, a small boat appears on the horizon, casually drifting in the distance. Musashi is finally here, and Kojiro impatiently rushes to meet him at the shore. Now Musashi, unlike Kojiro, who is a proper by-the-book samurai, is kind of a weirdo. For one thing, he's super tall for the time, standing nearly 6 feet when most Japanese men of the era were only around 5 feet. His appearance is also very unsamurai-like. His face and clothing are dirty, he never bathes, and his hair is an uncombed mess. Despite all these oddities, Musashi is known throughout the land to be not only dangerous but also an incredibly cunning warrior. By the age of 29, he had already fought and won 60 duels to the death, killing his first opponent at the age of 13, and he's currently wandering Japan, seeking out and challenging the best swordsmen he can find to test his skills with the katana. Musashi is well aware of Kojiro's immense talent and knows that this fight will be his greatest challenge to date. The winner today will undoubtedly be deemed the greatest swordsman in all of Japan. Knowing the stakes, he's gone to great lengths to make sure he's given himself every possible advantage in this duel. Musashi nonchalantly steps off the boat, looking as dirty and disheveled as ever. He sees Kojiro's face and smirks. Kojiro is fuming after waiting 3 hours for his arrival. Musashi then reveals his chosen weapon for the duel, a crudely carved wooden sword that he had made out of a boat oar. Instead of showing up on time, he had spent the 3 hours carving this thing on the ride over to the island. Seeing this enrages Kojiro even more. Musashi's not even giving him the respect of facing him with his infamous two-sword style, and instead is planning to fight him with this. Without the standard bow to begin the duel, Kojiro begins yelling at Musashi, scolding him for being so late. This disrespect will not go unpunished, and he unsheathes his sword and throws the scabbard to the ground, signaling this will be a duel to the death. Musashi casually comments, "You have already lost if you think you don't need your sheath anymore," and he lifts his wooden sword into a ready position. Kojiro, now fully blinded by rage, charges in using his signature technique called the swallow cut. Musashi barely dodges, and his headband is sliced off his head. He jumps away and positions himself with the setting sun at his back. The late afternoon sun reflecting off the water blinds Kojiro, and he squints to try to keep track of his opponent. Seeing this opening, Musashi heaves his wooden sword and with all his might strikes Kojiro with a blow to his head. Kojiro cannot defend himself properly, and the sound of his skull cracking echoes on the beach, leaving his disciples gasping in shock as his limp body falls lifelessly to the sand. The greatest samurai duel in history is over in just one strike. Musashi, seeing Kojiro's disciples beginning to go from shock to anger, quickly jumps back on his boat, and his oarsman brings him back to the main island with no celebration. Now you may be saying, okay, that's pretty epic and all, but what was up with the boat oar? Well, that was actually part of Musashi's plan too. He had learned of Kojiro's giant odachi, and knowing he could not beat him with his standard katana, he carved his wooden sword to be 2 inches longer than Kojiro's weapon, taking away his greatest advantage. Musashi had carefully planned every aspect of the fight, from his late arrival, which he expected to upset Kojiro, to positioning himself with the sun to his back to blind him, and his wooden sword giving him the reach he needed to strike safely at a distance. With this victory, he's proven that he was not only the greatest swordsman in all of Japan, but also one of the greatest tacticians as well. Number 3. Andrew Jackson versus Charles Dickinson. Here in the U.S., we have a history of electing unhinged psychopaths to the office of the president, and out of everyone who's ever been commander-in-chief, I think Andrew Jackson is probably the craziest person we ever put in there. The guy allegedly participated in over 100 duels, and this story is probably the best example of why you don't ever want to get into a gunfight with a crazy person. Back in 1805, former Tennessee Senator Andrew Jackson is out at the racetracks betting big on his prize horse Truxton. He's supposed to go up against another horse named Plowboy, owned by this guy, Joseph Irwin. The winning horse was to take home $2,000, big money for the time, and Jackson was confident his horse was going to win. But days before the race, Irwin's horse gets sick and can't run. The men get into a disagreement about how much money Jackson should get from this situation, and most likely Jackson is being a complete asshole, as he was known to be. Irwin's son-in-law, Charles Dickinson, hears of this and steps in. Dickinson, like Jackson, has a huge ego and a hot temper, and it doesn't take long before the two start slinging insults at each other in private letters and out in public. Dickinson calls Jackson a worthless scoundrel in one letter, and later at a party he goes on talking shit about Jackson's wife, saying Jackson is getting some guy's leftovers as his wife hadn't even divorced her first husband yet. That one really, really pisses off Jackson because, well, it was true. Dickinson pops off one last time, writing an article in the local newspaper calling Jackson a poltroon and a coward. Sick burns. And this one sends Jackson off the rails. 3 insults is just too much for him to handle, and he formally challenges Dickinson to a duel. Now, Dickinson is actually totally cool with this because it's well known that he's an expert marksman with a pistol, actually probably one of the best shots in the state. So he accepts the challenge with full confidence he's going to put that bitch Jackson down for good. Meanwhile, Jackson and his friend, knowing that Dickinson is a way better shot, try to come up with all kinds of harebrained schemes to increase Jackson's chances of winning. They come up with a plan of trying to get Dickinson to shoot first because maybe they can rush him and he'll miss, and then Jackson would have all the time he needs to aim properly. This strategy did have the risk of Dickinson, not missing and Jackson dying before he had a chance to shoot. But hey, this was the best they could come up with, and I told you already, Jackson was unhinged, to say the least. By this time, dueling was actually illegal in the state of Tennessee, so the men crossed the border into Kentucky. And on the morning of May 30th, 1806, Jackson and Dickinson, along with their seconds, made their way to a secluded spot in Adairville. The two men marched to their positions, 24 feet apart, with their pistols in hand. The duel begins, and Dickinson expertly points his pistol at Jackson, aiming for his chest. He pulls the trigger, and in a flash of gun smoke sends a lead ball hurtling towards Jackson and scores a direct hit, inches from his heart. The former senator staggers back, clutching his chest. Blood seeps out from beneath his hand, staining his shirt, but Jackson does not fall. Dickinson lowers his pistol in disbelief. His aim was true, and that was surely a kill shot. Dueling rules stated that now he must stand still and allow Jackson to take his shot. He looks across the field and can't believe what he's seeing. The injured Jackson, face white as a ghost, still clutching his chest with one hand, slowly raises his pistol and takes aim. Jackson pulls his trigger, and Dickinson winces, expecting an impact, but nothing happens. Jackson's gun is misfired. Now, dueling rules say that a misfire still counts as a shot, and the duel should have been over. But Jackson? He doesn't give a fuck about the rules and recocks his pistol and aims again. He pulls the trigger, and this time the shot rings out. The lead ball hits Dickinson square in the chest, and he falls to the ground. Though people try to save him, he bleeds out and passes away within 24 hours. Jackson's wound is examined by his doctors, and it's discovered that Dickinson's bullet has broken a few of his ribs and is so close to his heart it can't be removed safely. He recovers, but the bullet remains lodged in his chest for the rest of his life, causing him a lot of pain. Jackson's reputation took a major hit from the duel because, he kind of just murdered a guy in cold blood. But not enough to prevent him from becoming president in 1829, which just goes to show you can be a horrible person and still become president of the United States.